On the morning of March 13, 1964, a 28-year-old bar manager named Kitty Genovese was walking the last 100 feet from her car to her apartment in the Kew Gardens neighborhood of Queens, New York, when a man attacked her with a knife. She screamed. Lights went on in the apartment building above. A neighbor shouted from a window. The attacker retreated into the shadows, but nobody came downstairs. Minutes later, the attacker returned. He found Genovese collapsed in the hallway of a neighboring building, and he stabbed her again. She was still alive, calling for help. Nobody came. He left and returned a third time. This time, he killed her. 2 weeks later, the New York Times published a front-page article that would become one of the most cited pieces of journalism in the 20th century. The headline read, "37 who saw murder didn't call the police." The story described dozens of neighbors who watched or listened as a woman was murdered over the course of 35 minutes, and not one of them picked up a phone. The article detonated across the country. Editorials raged about the moral collapse of urban America. Ministers preached sermons about the death of compassion. New York was condemned as a city of cold, indifferent spectators. But two young psychologists reading the coverage in their respective offices had a different reaction. They did not believe the neighbors were evil. They believed the neighbors were human, and that something about the situation itself had prevented them from acting. Their names were John Darley and Bib Latané, and over the next several years, they would design a series of experiments that would fundamentally change how we understand human behavior in emergencies, and reveal a cognitive phenomenon that operates in boardrooms, hospital corridors, online platforms, and the climate crisis with the same quiet, lethal efficiency. Before we continue, an important note on the Genovese case itself. Decades of subsequent investigation have revealed that the original New York Times report was significantly inaccurate. The number 37 was inflated. Several neighbors did call police. At least one woman went downstairs and held Genovese as she died. The attack was not visible from most apartments. Many residents heard sounds but could not determine what was happening. The story, as told in 1964, was partly a media construction. But the psychological research it inspired, that research is real, replicated, and profoundly important. Darley and Latané did not need the Genovese case to be exactly as reported. They needed it to ask the right question. And the right question was not, why didn't anyone help? It was, does the number of people present during an emergency change whether any individual person helps? The answer, demonstrated across dozens of controlled experiments, is yes. And the direction of the effect is the opposite of what common sense would predict. In 1968, Darley and Latané placed college students alone in a room and told them they would be participating in a discussion about personal problems via an intercom system. Each student believed they were speaking with 1, 2, or 5 other participants in separate rooms. During the discussion, one of the voices, actually a recording, began showing clear signs of a seizure. The voice stammered, choked, asked for help, and then went silent. When the student believed they were the only other person who could hear the seizure, 85% left their room to seek help. When they believed one other person was also listening, 62% helped. When they believed 4 others were listening, only 31% helped. The more people present, the less likely any single person was to act. Darley and Latané called this the bystander effect, and they identified 2 psychological mechanisms driving it. The first is diffusion of responsibility. When you are the only witness to an emergency, the entire moral weight of action falls on you. There is no one else. But when others are present, that weight is divided, psychologically, not rationally, across every person who could potentially act. Each bystander assumes someone else will step in. The result is that nobody does. The second is pluralistic ignorance. In ambiguous situations, people look to others for cues about how to behave. If nobody else is reacting, the situation must not be an emergency. Each person's inaction becomes a signal to every other person that inaction is appropriate. The group collectively constructs a shared reality in which nothing is wrong, even when something is clearly wrong. Darley and Latane demonstrated pluralistic ignorance with devastating simplicity. They placed students in a room filling with smoke, actual visible smoke pouring through a vent in the wall. When a student was alone, 75% reported the smoke within minutes. When the student was seated with two Confederates who had been instructed to calmly ignore the smoke, only 10% reported it. 90% of students sat in a room visibly filling with smoke and did nothing, because the people next to them were doing nothing. They did not decide the smoke was harmless. They looked at the other faces and concluded that if it were dangerous, someone would be reacting. Nobody was reacting, so it must be fine. The room continued filling with smoke. The bystander effect scales with terrifying consistency. A meta-analysis by Peter Fisher and colleagues in 2011 reviewed over 105 studies involving more than 7,700 participants and confirmed the core finding. The presence of other bystanders significantly reduces helping behavior. The effect is strongest in non-dangerous, ambiguous situations, and when the bystanders are strangers rather than friends, and is actually weaker in clearly dangerous emergencies, where the need for action is unambiguous. But the bystander effect is not confined to physical emergencies on dark streets. It operates with the same mechanics in professional environments, where the stakes are measured in careers, dollars, and sometimes lives. In 2001, the energy corporation Enron collapsed in the largest corporate fraud scandal in American history at the time. Thousands of employees lost their jobs and retirement savings. The company's accounting fraud had been sustained for years, but the fraud was not invisible. Internal auditors, external analysts, and board members had encountered irregularities. The financial structures were so complex that many people suspected something was wrong without being certain. And in that ambiguity, in the gap between suspicion and certainty, the bystander effect took hold. Each person who noticed a warning sign looked around and saw that nobody else was raising an alarm. Surely the board members knew more. Surely the external auditors had reviewed the numbers. Surely someone in a position of greater authority would act if there were a real problem. The diffusion of responsibility spread across hundreds of intelligent, qualified professionals, and the fraud continued for years. Sharon Watkins, the Enron vice president who eventually wrote a memo to the CEO warning of the accounting irregularities, later described the culture as one where everyone assumed someone else was handling the problem. She did not act because she was morally superior. She acted because a specific set of circumstances broke through the diffusion. She was personally asked to review documents that made the fraud undeniable. The bystander effect required ambiguity to survive. Remove the ambiguity, and a single person will act. But as long as the situation remains unclear and other potential actors are visible, the effect holds. The healthcare system provides life and death examples of the same dynamic. In hospital settings, the bystander effect has been documented during medical emergencies, where multiple staff members are present, but no single person takes charge. A patient's vital signs deteriorate on a ward. 3 nurses notice the change on separate monitors. Each assumes the others have also noticed and are either already responding or have determined the change is not critical. Minutes pass. Nobody acts. The delay can be, and has been, fatal. This is why modern hospital protocols assign explicit roles during emergency codes. You call the code. You get the crash cart. You start compressions. The protocols exist not because doctors and nurses lack compassion, but because decades of research have confirmed that without explicit role assignment, the bystander effect operates even among trained medical professionals in life-threatening situations. Aviation learned the same lesson after analyzing cockpit voice recordings from crashes caused by crew inaction. Junior officers who noticed errors by the captain frequently said nothing, diffusing responsibility upward to the higher-ranking pilot. Crew resource management training, now standard in commercial aviation worldwide, was developed specifically to counteract the bystander effect in the cockpit by creating explicit protocols for challenging authority when safety is at stake. The digital world has produced a bystander effect of unprecedented scale. Online harassment is the modern equivalent of Kitty Genovese's street, except instead of 37 witnesses, there are 37,000. A person is being publicly attacked, threatened, or humiliated in a social media thread. Thousands of people see it. The vast majority scroll past. Each person who sees the harassment and does nothing is experiencing the same psychological mechanics that Darley and Letonnet documented in the 1960s. Someone else will report it. Someone else will intervene. The platform will handle it. The diffusion of responsibility scales perfectly with audience size, and social media provides audiences of millions. Research published in the journal Computers in Human Behavior has confirmed that the bystander effect operates robustly in online environments. Users are significantly less likely to intervene in cyberbullying when they believe many others are also witnessing the incident. The screen provides physical distance, the username provides anonymity, and the visible number of other observers provides the diffusion. It is the perfect environment for inaction. Crowdfunding platforms reveal the bystander effect operating in charitable giving. A medical fundraiser for a child's surgery needs $50,000. When the campaign has received $49,000 and is $1,000 short, individual donations surge, because the small remaining gap makes each potential donor feel that their contribution is decisive. When the campaign is at $5,000 of $50,000, individual donations are smaller and less frequent. The remaining gap is so large that no single contribution feels like it matters. The same person seeing the same child gives more or less depending entirely on whether they perceive other people as already having acted. The child's need has not changed. Only the diffusion of responsibility has. The climate crisis may be the largest bystander effect in human history. The emergency is visible, documented, and scientifically unambiguous. Billions of people are aware of it, and the overwhelming majority are doing nothing meaningful in response. Each individual looks at the scale of the problem and concludes that their personal action, recycling, reducing consumption, changing their diet, is too small to matter. They look at the other 8 billion potential actors and assume that if the crisis were truly urgent, governments and corporations would be solving it. Each person's inaction reinforces every other person's inaction. The smoke is filling the room. Everyone is looking at everyone else. Nobody is moving. Climate psychologists have explicitly identified the bystander effect as one of the primary barriers to individual behavioral change on environmental issues. The diffusion of responsibility across billions of people makes each person feel that their contribution is negligible, which is mathematically true for any individual, but catastrophically false in aggregate. The bystander effect even shapes how institutions respond to systemic problems. A company discovers that one of its products has a minor safety flaw affecting a small number of users. The engineering department knows. The legal department knows. The quality assurance team knows. Each department assumes the other departments are handling it. Months pass. The flaw is not addressed. A customer is injured. This is not malice. It is not incompetence. It is the bystander effect operating inside an organizational chart, where the presence of other responsible parties diffuses the urgency for any single party to act. So, how do you break through the bystander effect, whether you are the person who needs help, the person who could provide it, or the person designing the system? The most effective technique, demonstrated repeatedly in the research, is to eliminate the diffusion by making responsibility specific. In an emergency, do not shout, "Somebody help." Point at one person and say, "You, in the blue jacket, call 911." The moment responsibility is assigned to a specific individual, the bystander effect collapses. The diffusion evaporates. That person acts. In organizational settings, the equivalent is assigning explicit ownership of every risk, every decision, every escalation path. Not "the team will handle it," but "Maria will handle it, and she will report back by Thursday." The bystander effect thrives on ambiguity. Kill the ambiguity, and you kill the effect. If you are a bystander, if you are the person in the room watching the smoke pour through the vent while everyone else sits calmly, recognize what is happening inside your brain. The calm faces around you are not evidence that the situation is safe. They are evidence that everyone is waiting for someone else to move first. Be the person who moves first. The research is unambiguous on this point. Once a single person acts, the spell breaks. Other bystanders follow. The pluralistic ignorance shatters the moment one individual demonstrates through their behavior that the situation is real and action is required. Darley and Latane did not discover that human beings are cowards. They discovered that human beings are exquisitely sensitive to social context, that our willingness to act is shaped less by our character than by the structure of the situation we find ourselves in. Kitty Genovese's neighbors were not monsters. The nurses who hesitated were not heartless. The employees at Enron were not corrupt. The millions scrolling past online harassment are not indifferent. They are all experiencing the same ancient social calculus, looking to the group for permission to act, and finding that the group is looking back at them, waiting for the same permission. The bystander effect is not a failure of morality. It is a failure of architecture, a mismatch between the social brain that evolved in small groups where every person's action was visible and consequential, and the modern world, where emergencies unfold in front of crowds so large that responsibility dissolves into mist. The antidote is not better people. The antidote is better systems. Systems that assign responsibility, eliminate ambiguity, and make every individual feel that they are the one person in the room whose action will determine the outcome. Because in the end, that is exactly what they are.